Smokey Robinson, the ageless soul legend, has finally opened a door he kept locked for most of his life. At 85, he has spoken about a secret that, according to many in the industry, sent tremors through the entire world of popular music. He revealed that he once lived through a forbidden love affair so powerful it could have shattered Motown, the most influential black music empire in America at the time. It was a love that pushed him to step outside his marriage vows, lose friends, and come dangerously close to sacrificing the career he had built from nothing just to stay close to one person. For more than 60 years, he wrote hundreds of love songs, but he has hinted that in his heart they were all truly written for one woman, a woman no one ever suspected. That relationship, buried in shadows, was believed to have fueled quiet rivalries, jealousy, and decisions behind closed doors that almost ripped Motown apart from within. So who was the woman powerful enough to make Smokey Robinson gamble everything he had ever earned? And why did he decide to speak about it now, at an age when most men choose silence? The answers, piece by piece, lie in the story that began long before the spotlight ever found him. On the 19th of February 1940, in the bleak chill of a Detroit winter, a black baby boy was born in a housing project people called the Brewster Projects, a place many residents described as where dreams went there to die. His birth name was William Robinson, Jr., but his mother, with a tenderness that never left him, called him Smokey. From the start, there was nothing easy or glamorous about Smokey Robinson's life. His father struggled with alcoholism. His mother cleaned the homes of white families to keep food on the table. Their apartment had a single, cramped bedroom, damp, stained walls, and nights haunted by the rattling of trains passing close by. His mother once told him, "We have nothing but your voice." And in that small, worn-out space, those words became a prophecy. Smokey grew up in grinding poverty, but his mind was always filled with melodies. While other boys played baseball in dusty lots, he scribbled lyrics on the backs of receipts and torn paper bags. His friends teased him, calling him the boy who never stopped dreaming. But it was that dream that pulled him away from the corners where drugs and guns silently claimed other kids his age. Detroit was booming then, its factories roaring, its assembly lines never resting. But for countless black families, real opportunity still felt like a promise meant for someone else. The Ford plant represented the peak of possibility: 12-hour shifts, heavy labor, and a lifetime of exhaustion. Smokey often watched workers pouring out of the factory gates, faces smeared with sweat and soot, and quietly told himself, "No, that will not be my life." At just 14, refusing the path laid out for most boys from his neighborhood, Smokey formed his first singing group, the Five Chimes, which would later become the Miracles. They performed in rundown bars under buzzing neon and flickering bulbs, crooning to half-drunk crowds that barely looked up at the stage. But when Smokey sang, something changed in the room. His voice, clear, aching, and impossibly sincere, had a way of cutting through the noise. People would later say he sang as if he were confessing directly to God. Then, in 1957, what many of them would later call fate, finally stepped into his story. Berry Gordy, a struggling but fiercely ambitious songwriter, met Smokey after a failed audition. Where others saw just another hopeful kid from the projects, Gordy noticed something rare: a perfect blend of raw soul, technical skill, hunger, and discipline. They quickly became partners, and almost like brothers. Gordy pushed Smokey to keep writing, to sharpen his craft. Smokey, in turn, pushed Gordy to think bigger than just writing songs for other people. In 1959, inside a modest blue house on West Grand Boulevard, an idea became a revolution. Motown Records was born. No one there could have predicted how far it would go or how many hearts it would break along the way. It was a historic moment, the beginning of a dynasty, and also the first page in the tragedy that would follow Smokey for the rest of his life. Smokey was more than a singer with a velvet voice. He became Motown's quiet architect, its keeper of emotion. He wrote songs for Mary Wells, The Temptations, Marvin Gaye songs about longing, betrayal, desire, and the desperate need to be loved. To outsiders, he looked like the happiest man in Detroit, successful, admired, always smiling. But behind that soft smile, according to people who knew him well, lived a restless and lonely soul. He longed not just for applause, but to be deeply understood, to be loved in a way that embraced all of who he really was. In an old journal he once wrote, "Every time I'm on stage, I feel like I'm hiding something." At the time, no one knew what he meant. But years later, when he admitted he had carried a secret affair that almost tore Motown apart, the meaning of that line suddenly became much clearer. In the early 1960 seconds, Smokey married Claudette Rogers, a fellow member of the Miracles. To fans and insiders alike, they were Motown's golden couple, handsome, talented, graceful. They appeared to be the picture of loyal, enduring love. But the life of an artist is rarely as peaceful as it appears in photographs. Endless tours, suffocating studio schedules, and the never-ending pressure to deliver another hit began to erode their marriage from within. The distance between Smokey and his young wife grew quietly, without shouting, without scandal, just night after night of absence. Meanwhile, inside Motown, a new girl group was preparing to rise. They were first called the Primettes, soon to be the Supremes. Smokey was the first to truly hear them sing. He was the one who took them to Berry Gordy, insisting that Gordy listen. He had no idea that by opening that door, he was stepping directly into his own fate. Among the three girls was one young woman, whose ambition seemed to burn through every word she sang, and whose gaze Smokey would never be able to forget. According to people who were there, something in the way she looked at him stayed with him long after the music stopped. One day, that look would make him risk everything he had ever tried to protect. From that point on, Smokey Robinson's story stopped being just about music and success. It became the story of a man split in two, part genius, part sinner, trapped between what he felt and what he knew was right. By the end of 1963, Diana Ross and the Supremes had exploded into Motown's newest miracle. Their hit "Where Did Our Love Go" shot straight to the top of the charts, and Diana Ross rapidly became an American icon. The lights, the stages, the magazine covers, everything revolved around her. But behind the cameras and away from the screaming crowds, there were nights at Hitsville's studio when only two people remained. According to one sound engineer, Smokey was almost always the last artist to leave the building and, as some staff quietly claimed, he almost never left alone. Those so-called late-night retakes often stretched past midnight. People reported hearing soft laughter drifting down the hallway, the faint clink of glasses, and then, suddenly, complete silence. On a bitter winter night in 1964, a security guard claimed he saw Diana Ross leaving the studio with Smokey's coat over her shoulders, slipping out into the cold Detroit air. The story spread quietly at first, then faster. Inside Motown, a place where everyone liked to say they were one big family, whispers like that were considered dangerous. Berry Gordy, Motown's founder, and the man who saw Smokey as a younger brother, was said to have been furious when someone finally told him the rumor. He knew Diana Ross was Motown's golden girl, the one star the label was willing to risk everything on. Any scandal around her could threaten the empire he had spent years constructing. Gordy reportedly issued an unwritten law. No one was to discuss it. No one was to put Diana and Smokey's names in the same sentence. It was never printed on paper, but everyone understood the rule. The problem was, by then, it was already too late. Whatever existed between Smokey Robinson and Diana Ross was no longer just a rumor. It had become what many would later call one of Motown's greatest and most fragile secrets. Claudette began to feel the shift. There were more and more nights when her husband didn't come home. Phone calls ended in abrupt silence. And on television, whenever Diana Ross appeared, the look in Smokey's eyes, according to friends, said more than any confession. A close friend of Claudette's once claimed she found a small scrap of paper in Smokey's coat pocket. On it were written the words, "You're the song I can never sing out loud." Smokey was slowly being torn in half. He knew he was betraying his vows. He knew the risk. Yet, he found himself unable to walk away. Diana was both light and shadow to him. She made him feel alive and destroyed at the same time. Inside the recording studio, they were two souls communicating through music in a language only they fully understood. Outside those walls, they had to pretend they were nothing more than colleagues, strangers bound by a contract to protect the same empire. By mid-1965, Berry Gordy stumbled across a mysterious demo recording, a song called "If They Only Knew." On the tape, a man's voice softly whispered the letter D before the melody began. According to studio staff, the recording disappeared from Motown's archives the very next day. Years later, some engineers would quietly insist it was Smokey's voice and that the song was meant for Diana Ross. Rumor had it Gordy ordered the tape destroyed. But there were also whispers that a copy survived, locked away in the safe of a former Motown employee, untouched and unheard. That same September, a small note appeared in the Detroit newspapers. Smokey Robinson moves out of his home, now residing in a downtown apartment. Motown offered no explanation. Inside the company, however, most people believed they knew exactly why Claudette had left. Smokey began to crumble. He buried himself in recording sessions, chain-smoked, and, according to those who saw him then, often drank until he fell asleep on the studio couch. His music grew heavier, more sorrowful. Ooh Baby Baby was born during this painful stretch of his life. A confession wrapped in melody, apologies, regret, and the admission that even knowing he was wrong, he still couldn't stop. Diana changed too. She seemed more distant, more controlled, and far colder than the young girl who once relied on Smokey's encouragement. Some insiders said she started spending more and more time with Berry Gordy, the most powerful man at Motown. According to a few staff members, Smokey once walked in on the two of them together at a party. They claimed he turned around and left immediately, without saying a word. By late 1966, Smokey began skipping photo shoots and press events, stepping slowly out of the spotlight he had helped create. Claudette returned to him briefly, but whatever they had shared was already broken beyond repair. Motown kept its public silence, but behind the scenes, almost everyone knew. Smokey Robinson had lost both the wife he married and the woman he could never admit he loved. When Motown later moved its base of operations from Detroit to Los Angeles, employees cleaning out Smokey's old office reportedly discovered a small wooden box in a drawer. Inside, they said, was an unsent letter and an old photograph of two people in a recording room. The letter contained only one line: "If anyone ever asks who I wrote for, tell them it was you." No one knows if that letter ever reached the person it was meant for. But according to people who watched him work, something in Smokey changed after that. From then on, he never wrote music quite the same way again. Years later, in an interview at 85, when someone asked him about the woman he could never forget, Smokey paused for a very long time, then smiled with a kind of quiet pain and said softly, "It was the most beautiful and the most wrong thing I ever lived." People close to Motown's past often say that secret was buried along with a piece of the label's soul, a place where love, music, and sin once merged into a single story, shaping a chapter of history that was as luminous as it was devastating. However, that forbidden affair did not fade quietly into the background. It grew even more dangerous when a third, far more powerful figure stepped fully into the center of the story. By 1965, American music had entered what many would later call the golden age of Motown. And at the heart of that storm, three names were almost always spoken together: Smokey Robinson, Diana Ross, and Berry Gordy. If Smokey Robinson was the heart, the soul, the feeling, then Berry Gordy was the hand of power, the one who signed the checks, made the calls, and decided who rose and who disappeared. He was the man who, according to many who worked with him, could turn even matters of love into calculations on a ledger. After the frenzy surrounding "Where Did Our Love Go?", Diana Ross officially became Motown's star face. She was the girl who had started in the same Brewster housing projects as Smokey, now transformed into a queen of American pop culture. She appeared on magazine covers, walked red carpets, wore gowns that shimmered under television lights, and performed at the White House as the embodiment of black excellence in a segregated America. To the public, it looked like the perfect modern fairy tale rags to riches, all under Motown's shining banner. Behind that glamorous curtain, though, insiders whispered a different version. They said Diana Ross was not just Motown's brightest star. She was Berry Gordy's woman. According to many who were there, Gordy and Ross's relationship became something like an open secret by late 1965, only months after Diana and Smokey were believed to have ended their hidden affair. Gordy, who had once treated Smokey like a kid brother he wanted to protect, began to look at him differently, more guarded, colder, with a distance that felt like betrayal wrapped in professionalism. A former member of the Temptations once recalled Berry Gordy making a chilling statement behind closed doors. "Diana's mine. Anyone who touches her will be erased from Motown." That rule was never written in any company manual, but everyone understood exactly what it meant. And so, slowly, the man who had given Motown so much of its sound and spirit, Smokey Robinson, started to be nudged to the edges of the empire he helped build. Motown was moving into a new era, and the cost of crossing its king was becoming painfully clear. Diana Ross received privileges no other artist at the label could dream of. She was given solo features while the Supremes were still officially a group. Her records were prioritized for release. Film roles appeared for her as if designed out of thin air. Every song she recorded, every stage she stepped onto, seemed to carry Berry Gordy's fingerprints. Some people said he loved her. Others believed he was shaping her, molding her into his ultimate creation, his perfect masterpiece and product. Rumors multiplied. It was said that Gordy and Ross were living together in a Los Angeles penthouse far away from Detroit and its watchful gossip. When reporters asked about it, both denied the story. But people inside Motown insisted quietly that Diana had something no other artist had ever been granted: her own key to Berry Gordy's office. Then came early 1969. Diana Ross became pregnant. The reaction inside Motown was immediate and suffocating. This was still an era where a single scandal could end a career overnight, especially for a woman presented to America as pure, glamorous perfection. Gordy moved quickly, covering every angle. Officially, on paper, the baby's last name was listed as Silverstein, tied to Diana's future husband, Robert Ellis Silverstein. But nearly everyone in the company, from secretaries to songwriters, believed they knew the real story, that little Rhonda Ross was Berry Gordy's daughter. It would take years before DNA testing confirmed that belief, but inside Motown, the truth had been quietly accepted long before it was ever proven. During this time, Smokey Robinson said nothing. The man who had once loved Diana in secret did not defend her, did not criticize her, did not publicly congratulate her. Friends later said he seemed to vanish from Motown for nearly 6 months, drifting through Los Angeles bars, avoiding both Berry Gordy and his wife Claudette as if they were ghosts he could not face. That same year, Claudette Robinson filed for a temporary divorce. In court documents, she wrote a simple, devastating line: "We have lost the ability to trust one another." She never mentioned Diana Ross by name, but the tabloids did what they always do. Headlines screamed about a love triangle shaking Motown to its foundations. Berry Gordy, determined to protect his empire, reportedly forbade any employee from talking to the press. Articles hinting at internal war inside Motown quietly disappeared. Stories were pulled or rewritten. But the more they tried to bury the truth, the faster the rumors seemed to spread. One story claimed Claudette confronted Diana backstage at a Las Vegas show, demanding answers face to face. According to that account, Claudette cried through the entire flight back to Detroit afterward. No one knows exactly what was said in that backstage room. What is known is that the very next day, Smokey packed his bags and moved out. Through all of this chaos, Diana Ross continued to rise. In 1970, she officially left the Supremes and launched her solo career, with Berry Gordy financing every step. Her debut solo album, simply titled Diana Ross, featured the anthem, "Ain't No Mountain High Enough." To the public, it sounded like a song about unstoppable love. To many inside Motown, it felt more like a declaration of independence, a message that she belonged to no one, or perhaps that she belonged only to the man pulling the strings. For some in the Motown circle, that song carried a different meaning altogether. To them, it was a statement of power. Diana Ross did not just belong to Berry Gordy. Emotionally, she belonged to him as the centerpiece of his empire. Smokey eventually returned to Motown, but not as the man he had once been. His role was smaller, quieter. He was no longer on the executive songwriting board. His name began to vanish from official company statements and press releases. Friends said he lived like a ghost in the building, arriving early, sitting alone in a corner of the studio, writing songs, then tearing up pages before anyone else could see them. When someone finally asked him why he was so hard on his own work, Smokey reportedly answered in a low voice, "I'm trying to forget someone I can't forget." That was the period when a new enemy entered his life, one that didn't sing, didn't speak, but numbed everything it touched: addiction. Quietly, privately, as if he were punishing himself, Smokey Robinson slipped into cocaine use. It didn't start as a party drug for him. Years later he admitted, "I didn't get high to party, I got high to forget. To forget Diana, to forget Claudette, to forget Berry Gordy and the triangle that had taken nearly everything from him." While Smokey sank deeper into his private darkness, Diana Ross climbed higher into the spotlight. She took on the role of Billie Holiday in Lady Sings the Blues, a film personally produced by Berry Gordy. Her performance earned her an Oscar nomination and cemented her status as a legend. Motown was no longer just a record label, it had become a kingdom, and in that kingdom there was one king and one queen. Those who crossed them, according to many former staff members, simply faded away. Some were quietly released from contracts, others just stopped getting calls. Even old friends learned that in Berry and Diana's world, loyalty had limits, and there was a price for standing on the wrong side of their story. By 1973, Smokey Robinson officially stepped down from Motown's board of directors. There was no public tribute, no farewell party, no official statement thanking the man who had written so much of the label's history. In one rare photograph from that year, he stands at the edge of a stage, almost in the shadows, watching as Berry Gordy and Diana Ross smile together under the spotlight. For many who later saw that picture, it looked like the period at the end of a long, painful sentence. Yet what haunted people most about that era was not what the cameras captured, but what they never did. When Diana gave birth to her daughter, it was said that Smokey sent a bouquet of white roses to the hospital. No signature, no explanation, just a small note that reportedly read, "May she never know the storms we've seen." No one can say for certain if the story is true or just another Motown myth polished by time. But almost everyone who lived through that period agrees on one thing. Motown may have been built on music, but it survived on secrets. And the most dangerous secret of all was the twisted, fragile bond between Diana Ross, Smokey Robinson, and Berry Gordy. Three people who helped create the sound of America and nearly destroyed each other in the process, all in the name of love. After losing Diana and watching Motown slowly slip into other hands, Smokey Robinson was no longer the man the public thought they knew. On stage, he still smiled, still moved with the same grace. But in interviews, he carefully avoided the past. He rarely spoke about love, almost never about heartbreak. Instead, his confessions shifted into a different language, the language of music. Over time, his songs grew deeper, darker, more layered. People said Smokey no longer told the truth with interviews, he told it with melodies. By the mid-1970 seconds, after years of loneliness and fighting his own addictions, Smokey returned seriously to the studio. Out of that period came an album released in 1975, A Quiet Storm. Even the title felt like an X-ray of his inner life, something powerful raging inside, but contained, controlled, barely allowed to surface. The music spoke of a man loving in the shadows, unable to let go, yet unable to make that love visible to the world. The phrase "quiet storm" would go on to name and define an entire subgenre of R&B. Late-night radio shows across America borrowed it, building atmospheres around it. But very few listeners realized that this quiet storm began as Smokey's own private weather, his grief, his longing, his unresolved love turned into sound. In a 1979 interview, he hinted at the truth without naming it directly. Sometimes the loudest things are the ones we don't dare to say. Fans who had followed him for years understood. They began to call A Quiet Storm the letter, with no address, an album written for the woman he could never publicly claim. In 1981, Smokey released Being With You. The tune was gentle, almost disarming, but the lyrics pushed further than many expected. Lines about not caring what people thought, insisting that simply being with you was enough, sounded like the voice of a man who had once loved in a way the world called wrong, yet carried no regret in his heart. Most casual listeners embraced the song as just another tender love ballad, but for those who knew the buried story of Smokey and Diana Ross, the message inside felt unmistakable. Toward the end of the song, he wrote, "I don't need approval for the love I feel inside." It was a quiet act of defiance against judgment, against gossip, perhaps even against Berry Gordy himself. By then, Diana Ross had already left Motown and was living in Los Angeles, building a life beyond the label that had made her a star. Smokey, though still tied to Motown in a loose, complicated way, no longer held the power he once did. Local papers in California began to note a strange pattern. Whenever Diana performed in the state, people claimed they saw a middle-aged man in dark glasses sitting close to the stage. He would arrive just before the show started and leave the moment the final note faded. No one could ever prove who he was, but almost everyone insisted it was Smokey Robinson, watching from the crowd, unwilling or unable to stay away. In 1987, Smokey made what many called a triumphant return with the song "Just to See Her." It was a slow, aching love piece that seemed to hang in the air long after it ended. The lyrics spoke of how far a man would go just to witness a woman smile one more time, just to be close enough to touch her hand again. The track earned Smokey his first solo Grammy, a milestone that should have felt purely victorious. But to those who listened closely, it sounded like something else, a release, a letting go that came wrapped in tenderness and sorrow. He told Jet magazine, "I don't know who I wrote that song for. Maybe for everyone I ever loved, or maybe just for one person I never stopped loving." Many fans believed that unnamed person could only be Diana Ross. Only weeks after "Just to See Her" climbed the charts, Diana Ross appeared at the 1987 Soul Train Awards, where Smokey performed the song live. Under the lights, he sang the final lines with a quiet intensity. Cameras caught Diana rising from her seat, applauding, her eyes shining with tears. The media exploded. Ebony ran a headline that read something like, "A look shared, a secret remembered." Reporters began to speculate. Some journalists claimed the two legends met privately in a VIP lounge after the show. One backstage employee later said, "They didn't say much. They just looked at each other, then hugged for a long time like two people who'd been through a war and were meeting again among the ruins." Both Diana and Smokey denied any dramatic reunion. Diana stayed silent. Smokey simply smiled and said, "Feelings in music don't need explanations." After that night, people started to hear his catalog differently. Every Smokey Robinson song seemed to carry a second layer, an echo beneath the melody. Tracks like "One Heartbeat," "I Love Your Face," and "Why You Want to See My Bad Side" began to feel less like simple love songs and more like scattered pages from a diary. A diary kept by a man who had once stepped into a fire he knew was forbidden and lived with the scars forever. By the late 1982, Smokey moved quietly into middle age. He slipped away from the constant glare of celebrity, rarely gave interviews, and appeared less often on television. And yet, in smaller venues, on dimly lit stages, his music still seemed haunted by ghosts. At intimate shows, he would sometimes stop in the middle of a song, stare into the distance for a moment too long, and then give a faint, knowing smile before continuing. One fan recalled watching him perform "Just to See Her" live. She said his eyes kept drifting toward an empty seat in the front rows, as if someone used to sit there but didn't anymore, as if he were still singing to a presence the rest of the room could not see. Diana Ross understood that silence. In a 1990 interview, when someone asked which Smokey Robinson song moved her the most, she didn't hesitate. "The Quiet Storm," she answered. Then she added, "I know who that storm belonged to." In that single sentence, she seemed to acknowledge what had never been fully spoken. Perhaps neither of them ever needed a public confession. Smokey's music was his confession. Diana's silence and those rare, carefully chosen words were her answer. But the emotional wreckage left behind by their story did not belong to Smokey alone. The price for what had happened inside Motown was not his burden only. Diana Ross paid for it too through the life she would live once she stepped away from the kingdom that had crowned her its queen. After leaving Motown in the early 1970s, Diana Ross stepped into a new chapter of her life, one that looked brighter than ever from the outside, yet was said to be lonelier and more fragile than any fan could imagine. It was not just the story of a superstar. It was the story of a woman who had once been adored like a goddess, then slowly consumed by the very light that made her untouchable. In 1970, her first solo album, Diana Ross, was released. To the world, it was a dazzling debut, proof that she could stand alone without the Supremes and still dominate the charts. But to those who had lived through the Motown years from the inside, that record symbolized something else entirely the moment Diana officially stepped out of Berry Gordy's direct shadow. The man who had loved her, shaped her, and controlled so much of her destiny was no longer the sole architect of her future. After giving birth to her first daughter, Rhonda Ross, their relationship reportedly cooled. Diana, according to people close to her at the time, understood that staying under Motown's thumb forever would eventually devour her. If she truly wanted to survive as Diana Ross, the person, not just Diana Ross, the product, she would need to take control. But real freedom always comes at a cost. She carried fame, wealth, and recognition across the world, but she also carried something invisible. A chest full of secrets that Berry Gordy, according to several insiders, never wanted to see in print. One of the most explosive rumors of that era claimed that Diana once threatened to release a tell-all memoir, exposing the truth about her relationships with both Berry Gordy and Smokey Robinson. In 1974, Rolling Stone briefly ran a small piece under the headline, "What Diana Knows Could End Motown." Within 48 hours, the story vanished, pulled from circulation without explanation. By the mid-1970s, Diana turned more forcefully toward Hollywood. She took on the role of Billie Holiday in Lady Sings the Blues, a film produced under Berry Gordy's watch. The performance earned her an Oscar nomination, cementing her as not just a singer, but an actress capable of carrying a film on her shoulders. Yet, behind the camera, according to some crew members, the set was a storm. People later claimed she sometimes lost control, shouting at staff, throwing cups or props when upset. There were whispers of late-night phone calls from a man with a deep, familiar voice. Some insisted it was Gordy. Others swore it was Smokey Robinson. No one ever confirmed which version, if either, was true. By 1975, Diana Ross was living the kind of life most people only see in films. A mansion in Beverly Hills, a driveway lined with luxury cars, closets full of custom-made gowns. But several people in her inner circle said the brighter her surroundings became, the darker her nights grew. She was believed to rarely sleep through until morning. Instead, she would wander around the pool in the early hours, a glass of wine in hand, letting old Motown records spin on repeat. One housekeeper later recalled hearing her play "The Tracks of My Tears" late at night. According to this account, Diana stood alone, listening to Smokey's voice, crying quietly. When the housekeeper asked if she was all right, Diana reportedly said, "He understood me better than anyone." Whether that quote is perfectly accurate or softened by memory, it adds another shadow to the picture of a woman haunted by what could never be publicly discussed. Then, in 1979, Diana entered a relationship that stunned Hollywood. She became involved with Gene Simmons, the bassist and frontman of the rock band Kiss, famous for excess, painted faces, and a lifestyle built on hedonism. He had previously been romantically linked to superstar Cher, who was also once close to Diana. When the news of Diana and Gene's relationship spread, the entertainment world erupted. Cher, feeling exposed and betrayed, reportedly cut all ties and never looked back. The press quickly crowned Diana the queen who takes what she wants, a woman who would claim anything: men, roles, attention, if it meant staying at the top. But those closer to the situation painted a different picture. According to one of Simmons's old friends, Diana wasn't chasing thrills or headlines. She was searching for something she could never quite name. Years later, Gene Simmons himself would recall that she barely slept, hardly ate, and often talked instead about people who had walked out of her life. He mentioned that she kept circling back to a black musician from her past and admitted he didn't dare ask for his name. Through the 1,000 980 seconds, Diana's image in public grew more complicated. Reports of erratic behavior began to surface. She was described as controlling, cold, quick to anger. One story claimed she fired an assistant in front of an audience. Another said she slapped a dancer on stage because he stood too close to her spotlight. Whether every detail was accurate or exaggerated by tabloids, a powerful image began to take shape. A lonely queen atop a high throne, surrounded only by mirrors and echoes. Then came Motown 25. Yesterday, today, forever. In 1983, the legendary TV special marking the label's 25th anniversary. It brought nearly every iconic name back under one banner. Stevie Wonder, The Temptations, Marvin Gaye, Smokey Robinson, and of course, Diana Ross. The air backstage felt heavy with history. When Diana stepped onto the stage, the crowd rose in a wave of applause. Smokey, seated near the front, watched in silence. It was as if two different eras of Motown were staring at each other across a gulf of time and regret. After the show, they reportedly met backstage. Witnesses described one brief hug, no visible words exchanged, and then they drifted apart in opposite directions. A photographer who was there said later, "They didn't smile, they didn't chat. They just looked at each other like there was still something neither of them had ever said out loud." That moment, frozen in a few blurred photos and many memories, fueled speculation for years. After that night, Smokey Robinson and Diana Ross never officially worked together again. But according to some insiders, the story did not end there. It was said that Diana quietly visited Smokey in Los Angeles once in late 1984. A source claimed they sat together for around 3 hours, talking only about music, never directly touching the past. When she left, that same source insisted, Diana's eyes were red and she wiped away tears as the car door closed. By the late 1980 seconds, as the industry shifted and new stars took center stage, Diana Ross's reign began to dim, not vanished, but no longer absolute. Motown itself was no longer the same kingdom it once had been, and the secrets that once held it together were starting to leak into the world. By the late 1980 seconds, Diana Ross's reign was no longer absolute. The world still knew her name, but the glow around it had started to dim. Motown, now folded into a larger corporate structure under Universal, no longer revolved around her every move. Her album Eaten Alive underperformed, critics accused her of repeating herself, and for the first time in decades, Diana began stepping back from the spotlight. She pulled away from relentless public life and focused more on her children. But even as the cameras faded, the whispers never did. In 1996, a former Motown manager published a memoir that included one chilling detail. He claimed Diana Ross had once been strictly instructed never to mention Smokey Robinson's name in interviews. According to his account, Berry Gordy feared that if Diana ever decided to speak plainly about her past, about what really happened between them and between her and Smokey, the entire Motown legend could crack open like a building made of glass and buried lies. Then, in 1999, Diana's name splashed across headlines again, but this time it wasn't for a record, a tour, or a film. She was arrested in Arizona for driving under the influence. The image of the Motown queen, disheveled, red-eyed, handcuffed by the side of the road, stunned the public. Police documents stated she laughed, cried, and kept talking about people who had betrayed her. A British tabloid later reported that she mentioned two names over and over, Berry and Smokey. In the years that followed, Diana withdrew even further. She settled into her grand estate in Connecticut, living almost like a ghost inside the mansion she once used as a symbol of success. She still performed occasionally, but carefully, choosing appearances instead of chasing them, and she avoided interviews whenever possible. A former friend claimed Diana keeps a small photo of Smokey Robinson in her jewelry box, tucked among diamonds and heirlooms. According to this friend, Diana once said he was the only person who had truly understood her silence. As for Smokey Robinson, the man who had once loved her so fiercely he nearly destroyed himself, that story took a different turn. Over time, he found his way back from the edge. He fought his addiction, rediscovered his faith in music, and learned how to live in a quieter, simpler way. When interviewers cautiously brought up Diana Ross, he usually answered with just a faint smile. In one conversation he said, "I still listen to her sing. Every time I hear that voice, I remember no matter what the world forgets, I never will." Two stars born from Motown, once pulled toward each other like two halves of the same soul, now lived on opposite sides of the United States. Between them lay decades of history, silence, and something that still refused to heal a secret or perhaps a wound that time had never fully closed. Today, at 85, Smokey Robinson is said to live quietly with his wife, Frances Gladney, in a peaceful home in Los Angeles. After 2 failed marriages and a lifetime spent weathering storms, he has chosen simplicity, mornings with tea, evenings with melodies. Songwriting now comes without the chaos that once surrounded it. Frances, who had been a longtime friend before becoming his wife, is described as the calm presence that keeps him grounded. Yet even she once told a reporter that Smokey carries more memories than any man I've ever known. Those memories stretch across 3 children, 2 with Claudette Rogers and 1 with a former lover, Candy Morell, and several grandchildren. But in recent interviews, Smokey rarely speaks at length about family. When someone asked who had been his greatest inspiration in music, he just smiled and replied, "She's still out there somewhere, still singing." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Meanwhile, Diana Ross, now 80, remains in her old mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, surrounded by visits from her children and grandchildren. She has 5 children, 3 with her first husband, Robert Ellis Silberstein, 1 with Berry Gordy, and 1 with her second husband, Arne Naess Jr., the Norwegian mountaineer, who died in a climbing accident in 2004. After his death, Diana began to pull away from the glittering world that had once been her entire identity. She avoids most interviews, rarely shows up at Hollywood parties, and often repeats a single line to those close to her. "My time now belongs to my family and to music, if it still wants to stay with me." But rumors have never stopped circling around them. After Smokey's 2023 public acknowledgement of their past affair, the media once again lit up with strange, unconfirmed stories. Some claimed that Diana sent a bouquet of white flowers to his home, unsigned, with a handwritten note that read, "I still hear the song." A stagehand later told reporters that during a concert in Las Vegas that same year, Diana began to sing "Being With You," a song Smokey had written and recorded. Halfway through, she reportedly stopped, gave a small, private smile, and looked toward a specific point in the crowd as if someone was there or should have been. Smokey, even in his 80s, still tours. He still sings with that smoky tone, still carries that familiar glimmer in his eyes whenever Motown is mentioned. His shows almost always end the same way, with "The Tracks of My Tears." One night, before singing it, he paused longer than usual and leaned into the microphone. In a low, roughened voice, he said, "This is for someone who never heard me say it out loud." The audience cried, many without knowing exactly why. But Smokey's eyes stayed locked on the front row, where one empty chair had been left waiting. On the seat, someone had placed a small bouquet of flowers. No card. No explanation. Their last public reunion came in 2019 at Motown's 60th anniversary celebration. The stage was dressed like a shrine to the past. When Diana Ross stepped out, draped in glitter and history, Smokey Robinson was already standing on the other side, waiting. They walked toward each other, took each other's hands, and for a moment said nothing at all. The hall fell into a heavy, expectant silence. One journalist later wrote that it didn't look like love anymore. It looked like memory brought back from the dead, something only 2 people who once shared a soul could fully recognize. Today, Motown itself survives mostly as a museum, a landmark, a tour stop, a memory framed in glass. In one of its small recording rooms, guides still tell visitors about the 2 souls of Motown, the man who wrote the love songs and the woman who made them immortal. Their photos hang on opposite walls, but their stories are told as if they form one long, continuous line. And somewhere, beyond the scripts and rehearsed tours, their connection is said to continue quietly. Every year on Smokey Robinson's birthday, a postcard reportedly arrives from Connecticut. The handwriting is carefully elegant. There are only 3 words on it: Still with love. No one can prove who sends it. No one signs it. But among those who know the story, almost everyone believes there is only one possible answer. One recent summer night, Smokey stood under golden stage lights in Los Angeles, singing "The Tracks of My Tears." As the last notes faded, a member of the audience later swore they saw an elderly woman in a wide-brimmed hat rise from the front row and leave quietly before the applause began. No one saw her face. No camera caught her. Only Smokey's raspy voice echoed over the microphone. "Thank you for still listening." After more than 60 years, two lives and two legends continue to move like notes in the same unresolved melody, never fully separate, never completely at rest. A forbidden love has turned into something larger than rumor, larger than scandal. It has become a legacy, one that words can never fully pin down. So now the question is yours. Do you believe these two icons still share a bond that can't be named even after all this time? Share what you think below, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories that are still waiting, quietly, to be uncovered.